All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. And once again, thank you all for joining today. Today's educational webinar is the evolution of operational MDM, brought to you by Datasource Consulting, an EXL company. And as you know, we are big believers in educating the data community on what we're passionate about here and continuously learning here at Datasource. Our speaker today is Bryson Dunn, our MDM Competency Director, who will introduce in more detail here shortly. And first, let me tell you a bit about Datasource Consulting and how and why we know about this topic. We are a pure-play enterprise data management, modern data architecture, and decision intelligence consulting firm. About a year and a half ago, we were acquired by EXL Service as part of their analytics arm, so we're excited to now be able to offer end-to-end solutions from managing enterprise data to providing those deeper business insights. And as far as how we deliver, we divide our services into two categories. We have strategic work, where we're doing data governance, vendor tool evaluation and selection, data virtualization, and then we have the implementation arm, the doers, and this is the engineers and architects who work closely with internal client teams to help deliver on the recommendations we make through our strategy work, and that includes architecture, cloud and BI, and decision intelligence, data quality, and of course, MDM. So with that, let me introduce your guest speaker, Bryson Dunn. Before and since he took on the role of our MDM director, Bryson has been passionate about understanding his customers' unique challenges and implementing innovative solutions to overcome them. He has experience as a business development manager, solution architect, and full stack developer, and he really encourages the individuals and teams and organizations he advises to take a holistic and pragmatic approach to data management. And as our MDM Competency Director, Bryson's accountable for overall project success and establishing our MDM delivery methodology, bringing technical and vertical solutions to market, and really driving our business development there too. And he is based right here in Denver. So thank you, Bryson, for being our speaker today. This topic, operational MDM, is exciting for us because we're always asked about MDM and how it can help businesses. And analytical MDM solutions are great for establishing a consistent and single view of your master data, like customers, and leveraging that high quality data to enhance reporting and analytics. And these solutions are typically quick and easy to implement. But today's subject, operational MDM, those solutions, on the other hand, build on that by delivering the single view of your mastered entities directly to the business and the applications that they use every day. And this does come with risks and complexity, but as you'll learn in this presentation, the outcome can be game-changing. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we're excited for this presentation. I do want to mention that if you have questions, you can utilize the questions field at the bottom of your GoToWebinar panel. We'll address those in the Q&A during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the presentation. And so with that, I will hand it off to Bryson.
Thanks, Allison. So to get us started, first let me start off by saying that I'm really excited to have the opportunity to present to the audience today. I hope at the end we have a great discussion about some of the things that you might be encountering when implementing or planning an operational solution. It's a broad topic, and certainly we can't cover it all in this session, but I hope it is useful. So to start us off, I wanted to set the foundation with, what is MDM in our perspective. Won't spend too much time here, but to understand what master data management is, you need to know what master data is. We like to think of those as the consistent and uniform set of identifiers and attributes that describe the core entities, to your business. I like to think of them as nouns. It can be people, places, things, and when we implement MDM solutions, we categorize the master data into domains. So that could be the customer domain, account, supplier, product, and of course the reference data associated with each, things like country lists or state lists or standard code values. Master data in an organization, it lives in operational systems. So these are your CRMs and ERPs. Master data is managed on a day-to-day basis. but it often lives in silos with differing format structures and potentially conflicting values. So what master data management aims to accomplish is to overcome a lot of those different conflicts and variances and silos by establishing a single version of the truth for your master data. Now, master data management, we like to think of it as a technology-enabled discipline. There are a lot of great tools on the market that will help you implement MDM, but MDM is much more than just a technology. In order to be successful with MDM, business and IT need to closely collaborate for a number of different reasons, and we'll talk about those in the presentation today. Okay, so to give a little bit of context about what we talk about when we say operational MDM, it's helpful to give a quick overview of the different types of usage styles. There are two primarily. Those are analytical and operational. And analytical, as Allison mentioned at the intro, what it really aims to deliver in terms of value is enhanced reporting and analytics. So an example platforms, your data lakes, marts, and warehouses. And often you'll have data stewards that manage that data, mostly consolidation types of corrections within the MDM solution. Now, operational MDM, it kind of builds on the analytical type of value, where you're not only delivering master data to your analytic platforms, but you're exposing and delivering that data to the people who operate your business on a day-to-day basis in the applications that they use on a day-to-day basis. An example of that would be to use that shared customer repository, throughout the customer, throughout the order fulfillment process, opportunity to order and order to cash. That's one example, and there are many others. But what this is often characterized by is that the MDM solution directly supports business processes, and it may be in the critical path for some. Data stewards move beyond just managing consolidation and kind of golden record attribution to leveraging the MDM solution for broader data quality management. There's also a need for a lot of real-time integration, and the combination of all of this results in a much higher degree of complexity when you compare it to analytical solutions. So today, what we are going to explore are a few of the common challenges that we encounter when helping our customers mature an analytical solution, to transition and evolve into an operational solution. And we'll give you some insight into what the common challenges are and what are some typical best practices and patterns that you might be able to use in your instance. And I should mention that these hold true not only when maturing an analytical solution, but also when implementing an operational solution off the bat. So some of the areas we're going to be talking about are entity definition and data modeling, implementing a 360-degree view of your mastered entities, data governance and stewardship, and then finally, data integration. So to start, the first challenge that we want to talk about is aligning a definition of your mastered entities across different functions and groups in your organization. The primary challenge here is that different groups, in this example, R&D, regulatory groups, or your supply chain group, will have different and sometimes conflicting definitions of what your customers, products, etc. are. R&D, for example, might think of a product as both something that has been designed and is being produced in a manufacturing company, but also as a product that is being conceived and designed and tested. Whereas in your supply chain group, they might just think of products as finished goods, and they might have different ways of looking at that product in terms of, what are the raw materials that are needed to manufacture it, et cetera. So it's not only, defining what, your different mastered entities are, but understanding the different ways that the data is used, how it supports business operations, what data is collected, where and when, and what are the key processes that use the data. And by understanding this, you can create a common business language, which is really the foundation of an effective operational solution. The other benefit of approaching it from this way is that business process can also help to define the scope of your project. You can target individual business processes or groups to implement an MDM solution in support of, and then phase the solution by onboarding additional processes or user bases in the future. So here's the typical problem that is kind of a real life scenario we encounter all the time. And it's related to establishing a shared definition of your customer. In this example, we have a bank, and there's a customer that the bank as an organization is interacting with. Two groups within the bank, the origination group and the underwriting group, are both interacting with the same customer and are capturing data elements or data attributes about that customer. One group will call the customer by one name, and the other group will call it by a slightly different name. Now, when you attempt to master this data, the whole idea is coming up with a single version of the truth for this customer and overcoming the conflicting nature of these values. And often we see that one group will lose, right? We'll pick one of these names or the other as to survive, so to speak, in the golden record or the single version of the truth. And agreement on what the name should be may never occur, and it's likely for valid business reasons. There might be very good reasons why these two groups need to call the customer by different names. But what that would lead to is non-standard master data consumption or a lack of adoption of that shared repository, where certain teams may insist on using their own data because it just doesn't meet their needs. So in terms of best practices, it's easy to say, much more difficult to accomplish in practice, but a well-designed operational solution needs to align with the way that the business sees and interacts with the mastered data that they use on a daily basis. And often it's difficult to reconcile those differences across lines of business, but that's very important. And you also need to understand how the master data will change as it progresses through its life cycle. And for the example of customer, the difference between a lead, a prospect, and a purchasing customer. And when you translate the business definition of the master data into the technical solution that supports it, the data model is really at the heart of this. And if you do it properly, the shared services and integration layers that we will talk about in the integration section of this webinar can be much more easily adopted, and you can increase the use of these services and minimize or eliminate point-to-point interfaces or interface-specific logic. So an example of how you might overcome the problem in the previous slide was to implement a name type. And this is a very common approach to modeling master data. And there are a couple of ways you can model that, either denormalized or normalized. But what I should mention is that it's not always the right approach to simply add attributes, right, at the request of different groups. you really need to understand why they're asking or need a new data element to be added to MDM, and make sure that it's for a good business reason. And oftentimes it is for a good business reason, but sometimes it's a limitation of their current process or the applications that they're using, and not necessarily a valid business reason. And in that case, you should also consider a change management process within that group to move towards a new standard name instead of continuing to use the data element that they're used to managing on a day-to-day basis. So the second challenge that I want to explore today is, I think, probably the most difficult and has the most pitfalls, I'll say, and that's establishing a single view of the entity within your source applications. There are a number of risks that come along with this, and for the technologists in the audience, what I'm talking about here is, publishing the data back to your source systems, your CRMs, your ERPs, so that you push that single view back to the application. And some of the risks that come along with that are, first, you can expose data quality issues to end users that they might not used to be seeing. So, for example, one of your sources might have incorrect data, or you might have an issue with your consolidation process where your matching is incorrect. You might undermatch or overmatch. And that data could then, if you're feeding it to a CRM system that users are interacting with and using on a day-to-day basis, they can see that data and they might not understand why the data is inaccurate or where the data is coming from, and it might, very importantly, impact their ability to do their job. They might not be able to contact the customer in this case, right? If they're not able to get valid contact information for the customers they're trying to reach. Another risk is that you could potentially have data security breaches due to overmatching or overmerging. In this example, if we have a web portal that is fed master data, consolidated master data, you could have two user accounts that are identified as the same person. And of course, depending on the integration architecture and the functionality of the web portal, you could have a scenario where one user is able to see transactions or history, for another customer, and that can be a huge issue. So that's another potential pitfall. Another risk is historical and transactional data loss. This one's very common, and this occurs when the integration and the synchronization between MDM and your operational applications isn't fully fleshed out and considered. In this example, if we merge two records that are duplicates within a CRM system, one could be identified as the winner and the survivor, and one would be considered as the loser. And what many organizations try to do is get rid of the duplicate records, essentially deleting the losing records. And there are a number of challenges with this. First, you may, depending on the application of the CRM application, you may not be able to transfer any of the associated transactional data or historical data from the loser to the winner. And if you delete it, you could lose data there. So that's another thing to be aware of. The last risk that I want to cover, and this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but some of the most common ones that we've seen, is that data integrity and application functionality could potentially be impacted. Depending on how your interfaces are constructed and how the data is synchronized between MDM and your operational applications, you could potentially run into a situation where referential integrity is impacted, or the application doesn't behave as expected, which again can directly lead to an impact on business operations. So some of the best practices that we like to bring to bear when we advise our customers: first, virtually expose that 360-degree view where possible. What this does is minimize the impact of the downstream applications, and it becomes a very valuable tool in terms of reusability. You can, of course, physically update the data where there is value as well, and of course, carefully considering the impacts. One thing I'll mention here when you consider implementing and delivering a 360-degree view is that master data is not the only consideration here. Associated transactional data like recent payments, support tickets, account balances, and even analytical data like risk scores or next best offer type of insights, along with that 360-degree view, can be hugely beneficial. And that's, of course, well beyond the scope of what we think of when we typically think of just purely master data. The other thing that we that we always consider when physically updating data in downstream applications is to, first of all, understand what the downstream impact is, not only within that application, but potentially, a couple of hops down the road, depending on the integration architecture. The other thing to consider is that you should maintain tight control over how the data flows across the landscape. And you need to ensure that processes and procedures for mitigation and remediation of data issues are established and that they're tested, because data issues will happen and you need to have well-defined processes in place to remediate them. Some of the common patterns that we see when establishing a 360-degree view are search before create. Search before create is a great way to reduce the creation of duplicates and reuse high-quality master data without having a huge impact on your operational systems and how they work today. Publish, subscribe integration is a highly valuable pattern that we always recommend, and establishing embeddable master data components in views are a great way to promote reusability and make sure that the highly valuable master data and associated transactional data is readily available to anybody who wants to use it. All right, so the next challenge that we'll talk about, data governance and stewardship. It's a broad topic. There are a lot of challenges associated with this, but some of those are that many groups and individuals will have skin in the game when it comes to master data management. We talked about this earlier with the conflicting views and making sure that all of the people are that have a stake in this, that leverage master data, are in alignment, and that can be a major challenge and is really a data governance type of topic. But it can be very challenging. Another challenge is that various types of users may be able to manipulate the data in different systems. So understanding who is able to manipulate the data, where, and how that data flows across the system can be challenging as well. Another consideration is, the amount of data steward effort and time that will be required, both as a part of your cutover process and as business as usual. Understanding, the different areas where data steward interaction may be required, and how long that's going to take is challenging. So some of the things that we recommend to our customers in the area of data governance and stewardship are, first of all, you need to closely coordinate and collaborate with all of the groups across your organization. Make sure their voices are being heard, and make sure you consider what are the operational, the business as usual implications of what you're designing and what you're building. So stakeholders, you need to identify them and make sure they're included in decision-making processes as you design your MDM solution. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be involved in every decision, but the right people need to be in the room and they need to have their voices heard. And at Datasource, we leverage our enterprise data framework methodology to help facilitate this. It helps to, first of all, discover, who has, the stakeholders involved and the owners involved, document that, and facilitate these conversations. You also need to understand how the data is managed in your operational applications. You should tightly control how the data flows across the system, and tightly control who has the ability to maintain and modify that data, while ensuring that the users have an improved ability to do their job. You certainly don't want to get into a situation where people are unable to do their job, or their job takes longer than it did before MDM. Maintaining the status quo is probably acceptable, but MDM really does have the potential to drive efficiencies across the organization, and so the goal should be to to improve the day-to-day jobs of the people who leverage this solution. And when you define data quality rules, another thing that we always recommend is that you not just consider the amount of development effort that will be required to implement these rules, as might be tempting for IT teams. You also need to understand what is the amount of remediation effort that will be required if there is an associated stewardship process with it. So, if manual intervention is required, make sure that you fully understand not only how long that manual intervention will likely take, and what is the volume of tasks that you're likely to see, both as a part of your go live and as a part of your business as usual day-to-day stewardship activity. You should prioritize high-value, low-effort rules, particularly where there's manual intervention required. Automate the remediation of data where it's practical, and plan for staff to support the stewardship workload. Lastly, the MDM solution should deliver user-friendly and role-specific stewardship interfaces and workflows. These should be tailored to the specific job that the stewards need to do to make sure that that's done as efficient as possible. Okay, so the last challenge that we'll talk about today is another broad topic. It's data integration. And one of the things that we frequently see with customers who are evaluating or currently implementing an operational solution is that data integration can be tightly coupled. And the business processes that are being supported by the master data solution often involve multiple groups and multiple applications. So what that means is that the business processes become increasingly dependent on not only the MDM solution, but the integration between these systems. And if point-to-point interfaces or tightly coupled interfaces are implemented, complexity can quickly become out of hand, and maintenance can be a major issue. And it can also be challenging to understand kind of the ripple effect of what a change in one system will mean to other systems within the landscape. So those are some of the typical challenges we see, related to data integration. In terms of best practices, you should always evaluate a shared integration layer. And that integration layer should be inclusive of batch, real-time, and near real-time data delivery needs. You should avoid logic that is specific to an interface or an application. That just improves maintainability and consistency. And it should also consider both inbound and outbound integration. This often involves a lot of different technologies: web services, SOAP REST, JMS, ESB, obviously ETL for batch integration, some different design patterns that you can bring to bear there as well. And when at Datasource, when we look at this problem, we categorize the two kind of areas of integration as ETL and what we call EAI, that's Enterprise Application Integration. And when you compare the two, ETL is better suited for larger volumes of data, higher latency requirements in terms of data delivery. You'll load maybe once per day or a few times throughout the day, and the number of targets are relatively low. With Enterprise Application Integration, it's better suited for smaller volumes of data, kind of incremental changes that are fed through over the course of a day. It's much lower latency. It could be real time or very close to real time, and it can more easily support larger numbers of target systems. And in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, you'll see an example of that, where we have an ESB and multiple systems subscribing to and publishing to the ESB, with MDM as kind of the central golden record system that facilitates all of that communication. So that's how we like to approach the problem of data integration. So to kind of wrap up the conversation here, after all of these challenges, hopefully you're not thinking, why does it make sense for me to do an operational solution? There's so much complexity. It really does deliver a lot of value. You get all of the benefits that come with analytical MDM in terms of enhanced reporting and analytics, but you also synchronize that shared master data and make it available to enterprise-wide for all of your business users to consume and leverage. You can move towards more centralized stewardship and authoring. You have a holistic process for managing master data now across the different groups and functions within your organization, which can lead to some serious efficiency gains. You can remediate data quality issues centrally, and of course, make a 360-degree view of your master data available across the enterprise. And this diagram that we have here is a real-life example of an operational architecture that we've implemented. And what I find when I create these diagrams is that analytical solutions are a little bit more linear in nature, with MDM as kind of a middle step in a single direction data flow. And when you move to a more operational architecture, MDM becomes more of a central component in a highly integrated system. And so in this example, it kind of illustrates how you have a batch integration layer to support one-time large volume loads at the top. At the bottom, you can see we have a standardized layer of shared web services and syndication processes. You can read JMS there. And in this case, we had an ESB to help facilitate a lot of that communication to downstream systems. You can also see where we have stewardship UIs, and we have even tailored web applications built on top of MDM for some of the specific business use cases and needs. So I think this is a good example of what a fairly typical operational architecture looks like. Okay, so that's all the content that we have for today. I hope you found it useful and you have a few questions for us. Allison, are the lines open? Are they able to ask questions in real time?
They are. Yep. Thanks, Bryson. That was a great presentation. We did have a couple questions come in. So I'll start with this first one here. In your experience, what is the most effective way to control data flow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, that's a fantastic question. So when it comes to data flow, one of the things that I always like to consider when designing a solution is to think about how the data is updated and managed within operational applications, and potentially, limiting data flow to incremental changes based on user interaction. And basically what that means is, not necessarily processing or publishing all of the data all at once, but trickle feeding that data over time as the data is updated and managed in the operational applications. And what that does is it not only controls the data flow and makes sure you understand, what data is being sent where, but it can also help to reduce the burden on data stewards, where they don't have as high a volume of tasks to process on a day-to-day basis.
All right, great. Thank you, Bryson. Another one came in. Can you give insights around survivorship challenges encountered?
Yeah, absolutely. Survivorship is another broad topic. And when we think of survivorship at Datasource, I like to think of it as kind of attribute level survivorship, where you survive the best name, for example. And also entity level survivorship, where you're choosing which customer to survive within a CRM system, or which business phone to survive out of multiple phone types. So that can be a major challenge. Determining what the rules are for both of those categories of survivorship. And I think it ultimately needs to tie back again to how the business sees and uses master data as a part of their operations. You need to understand the impact of what making a survivorship decision will mean, particularly what it will mean to the the losing value. And you also need to understand how that data is being published and consumed downstream, because of course you have history and lineage type of functionality within your MDM solution, so it can be easy to kind of roll back any changes that are sent downstream, but potentially you could be overriding attributes, and that could impact business operations. So there are a number of different considerations there when you think about survivorship.
Great, thank you. Now, is there a separate database system recommended or best practices for master data instead of keeping it as part of the operation system?
Yes. So often what people will do, and again, there are a number of vendor solutions available on the market that will help you to accomplish this, but typically what is done is you implement a centralized master data hub, and it's a central data store. Different vendor solutions will have user interface components you can leverage, workflow, different types of consolidation and match and survivorship rules that or algorithms that you can leverage as a part of that. You could also build your own if you are that adventurous. But yes, so the short answer is yes. Typically what customers will do is implement a separate master data repository, and then leverage that both for data stewardship activities and as a kind of a hub for publishing and consuming that data on an incremental basis.
Great, thank you. And this person says they are considering developing a reusable master data view. Do you have any recommendations on how to approach that?
Yes. So I'd say there are two primary approaches to implementing kind of that shared master data view. One is to develop user interface components. So you can establish kind of a shared embeddable view of master data, and of course, all of that associated transactional data that we talked about. And what that does is it provides an easy way to just embed that into existing applications. Now, there are a few limitations to that. typically, the applications need to be have web-based clients, which is becoming more and more common nowadays. But it does typically need to, support iframe embedding within the application. And the other kind of limitation with that is the bidirectional communication can be limited. So often you need, back-end web services to help support some of the interaction that's required. The other approach would be to implement, web services that allow different applications to come and fetch that data as needed, and then display it in, whatever format that, makes sense in that application. I think it's a lot. It's able to be integrated much more easily to a broader set of applications, but the effort to integrate that is typically a little bit higher. So what we recommend is that if that's a significant value driver for the MDM solution, you implement both, and so you can kind of pick and choose which one to use depending on the application and the use.
Thank you for that. Now, one more. This is kind of a different question. Can you recommend any good books that discuss the topic of master data management?
So there is one book. The title is escaping me, but it was actually published by a former DSC thought leader and consultant, Datasource employee by the name of Dalton Servo. I'm sure it has MDM in the title, but that's a great read if you're able to get it. I know you can find it on Amazon.
All right, thank you, Bryson. That looks like it's it for now for questions. And again, you're more than welcome, everyone, to contact us if you think of something after the fact. But Bryson, could you go to the next slide there? Thank you. So make sure you stay tuned. Our next webinar is on the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that will be September 20th, same day of the week and same time as we usually do here. And we really hope that you're all able to join us for that one, because this is a big thing coming up. It's sort of California's answer to GDPR. So again, the presentation today was recorded, so as soon as that link is live, we will send that out to everyone who registered, and you'll be able to view that on our website. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and we hope to see you in September. Thanks.